welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hostler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Hello, welcome back. I'm going to preface this podcast episode and let you know that the refrigerator that is in my quote-unquote recording studio, which is also my gym, which is also my garage, is making a humming noise, and I have no idea if that's going to be picked up enough, but if it does, I'm sorry, and if you didn't notice it and now you do because I brought attention to it, I'm really sorry as well. But this is kind of the best that we have to do with things, so we're gonna get through it together. Today's episode is going to be potentially triggering for some people if you have a long history of any sort of body image struggles. So I'm sure that you noticed that with the title, but I like to preface the entire conversation with that. So kind of like a little trigger warning, if you will. So if you're somebody who's kind of working through that, this could be triggering for you, and it might not be at the right time to listen to that. So with that being said, I wanted to record this podcast episode because I think there are a lot of themes that I notice in fitness in general, but especially with those that I work with. So I am constantly like seeking patterns and looking at themes and looking at like, okay, there are common issues that people run across, and why is that? And a lot of the time my brain will continue asking the question, why? Like, where does all of this come from? And this has been a part of my personality trait since I was very young. In fact, I believe when I was like, probably in grade school, I got a giant thick book for Christmas called The Big Book of Tell Me Why. I don't know if I've shared that on the podcast yet, but my parents, I believe it was them, may have been Santa Claus, I don't know. Somebody sent me or bought me that book as a joke because I was constantly asking why, and I very much like to understand things. And I think it can be helpful to have things pointed out to us. So I believe that when we have somebody that can connect the dots for us in ways that we were not able to before, I think it's like one of the most powerful things, and I think that's really what a lot of writers and creators do. And so there are themes that I notice and deeper reasonings behind things when it comes to fitness. And I work with people who get into my office based off of an injury or something like pain that is holding them back. That's most of the people that I work with. And I've noticed that there are common themes of the humans that I get to work with when it comes to fitness and movement. And those themes very much impact their ability to make progress. It often creates a lot of barriers for them, and it results in a lot of unlearning and things like that. And it really, a lot of it boils down to understanding a mindset and different themes without getting more in-depth and into it. So one of the themes that I notice is this constant focus on aesthetics, and it's very like common, and it makes sense that we are focused on aesthetics. Most people start fitness, and most fitness is presented to people, especially to women, but even to men at this point too. It's not just men, but men are very often presented fitness as a way to get strong and more explosive. And there are probably some problematic ways that men are experiencing fitness and how it's portrayed to them. But I am a woman, and I work a lot with women, and I see how fitness is portrayed to us as a means to change our body, to quote unquote fix ourselves. And I it's just all aesthetics based. And we're missing the beautiful like magic and power that fitness really has to offer us, which is how much it can do for us in our lives, in our functionality, and in our longevity. And most of the people that I work with kind of achieve some, like, for lack of a better word, transformation with their understanding and relationship with fitness, whether or not it was their intention, right? Because by the time they've come to see me, usually people are, if they have been a fitness person, quote unquote, for quite a while, they have gone through some sort of injury or something that really made them question what their identity was. And we have a lot of identity crises in my office and the people that I work with, because that is part of being human as well. And so when I work with people who have been in the fitness industry for a little while, and they get injured and they're like, well, I can't do things the way I was doing them before. Usually we have to take some sort of a time away, or we have to change what that looks like. And we get very attached to things when they provide us with results and when we have our identities attached to them. So a lot of people that I work with go through some transformation of understanding fitness is not my identity anymore. And, that is a big transformation for them. That's a big mindset shift. Probably the other half of people that I work with are going to be just people who might have been in fitness for a little while, or maybe have not been or not been able to, because every time they try, they get injured. And that's a very large part of who I work with as well. And those people are typically really frustrated because every time they try, they get injured. And a lot of the reasons that they get injured is because of their approach to fitness and their understanding of fitness as it's sold to women, which is, again, that way it's a way to achieve some sort of fat loss or manipulation of your aesthetics and your physique. And I'm not here to say that you cannot chase those things, but I do want to use this podcast as a little challenge for you to kind of check in with your relationship with fitness and see if maybe some of the barriers or the struggles you're experiencing as you are trying to maybe change your habits or make fitness part of your life, or if you constantly are injured, you might want to check into some of these ways that an aesthetic-based fitness program or an aesthetic-based mindset can really affect your progress. And that's kind of my purpose of this podcast. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that, if you have an aesthetic-based like focus, some of the ways that can affect how you are approaching fitness and what that can end up doing to you or to your progress. And then I'm also going to end the podcast with a few ways, a few examples of how to start making that shift into less of an aesthetic-based fitness approach and more about all the other things that fitness has to offer us, which are like function, right? Like I just told this story on my Instagram, I believe this week, but I have a client who turned 90 this year, and I've worked with her for 3.5 or going on 4 years now. And originally she came to me after a long stay in the hospital. So I will back this up very briefly and let you know that she was in a car accident a very long time ago, has had chronic neck issues for a very long time, has had scoliosis and this chronic kyphotic posture where she just has slowly leaned forward more and more, and her head feels very, very heavy. So she then went into the hospital at one of her many hospital stays. She's had multiple bouts of health issues. And when we go to the hospital, we typically are bedridden, right? So she wasn't involved in any fitness training, really. She grew up and raised kids on a farm, so she was very physically active. But then after the farm, she retired and was not doing very much activity. Went into the hospital, and you're bedridden. Maybe occasionally you get up, but if you think about how much we are moving throughout the day as general humans, and I'm sure you've done this because you've experienced being sick and you sat there for like a minute and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to move my body, right? You just feel like that has to happen. So a week at least of that, from what I recall, is what she had, and where she wasn't moving very much. And then a lot of times in the hospital, older patients are required to stay in their bed unless somebody is there to help them. So she had gone through that and got very, very deconditioned and lost her stamina, her endurance, her strength very quickly. because she didn't have much to start with, right? So if we have a big reserve to tap into, then the effects are not going to be as big. But if our reserve isn't very big, then the effects are going to be far greater because there is a higher percentage that we're tapping into now, if you understand kind of what I'm talking about. And so this is why what we do in our 30s and 40s and 50s really affect everything down the road. And sometimes we get so zoomed into what we're doing now and, oh my gosh, I can't miss one day. But then we forget, like, oh my gosh, well, one day here and there doesn't going to matter in like the grand scheme of 3 to 5 years, when you're even up to 10 years plus, when you're really building that reservoir that you eventually are, hopefully not, right? But could potentially end up like my client who's 90 and had to tap into it, right? So she didn't have much to tap into. So after that, she had to go to physical therapy because she was not able to walk very far without her head falling down, and she couldn't breathe because of the fatigue and the inability to maintain a good pelvis and rib cage position. She would just like collapse into herself, which is a lot of lack of strength of her postural muscles. And that caused her to not be able to breathe very well or hold her head up. And so there's a lot of problems with that. And she went to physical therapy. They did the best they could. She had a very typical physical therapy experience where they underloaded her, unfortunately. But then she came to see me and she was like, I think there's something else I can do. And I said, yes, we can get involved in fitness, and you can lift and we can exercise. And that's what we did. And I've worked with her now for a while, and she recently, a few weeks ago, had to go back in the hospital. And she was in the hospital for, I believe, it was a week again. And there were some complicated things that happened while she was in the hospital with her heart medication, and that threw her into AFib. So it took her a little while for them to get that settled. But by then she was already in the hospital for a week, and she got home and she said, she had called me at that point and we had a conversation, and she said, you know what? I remember when this happened. This is not the first time this has happened. I've gone to the hospital for like a week stay multiple times throughout my life. And she was just like, I've never, come out as well as I am now. So it didn't impact her as much. And I just had an appointment with her recently this week, and she's already bouncing back way quicker than she ever had. I haven't done anything super fancy with her in the last 3.5 years. She's lifting weights, and I have her on a walking program. So just think of that for you as cardio. She's doing a little bit of cars, of course, right? So I've got that mobility, the joint stuff, and she's doing a little bit of weightlifting, and she's doing her cardio. It's the same basics that we all need, and sometimes we get so lost in the details when we forget, like, okay, in the grand scheme of things, let's zoom all the way out and think about how much we are actually doing for our bodies, even if we aren't quite at our goals. So I wanted to tell that story because that is the perfect example of understanding exercise as a tool to give us this big physical preparedness, this big reservoir. A lot of people think of it as like every time you are doing exercise and working on your fitness, you are putting a coin in the piggy bank, and it is an investment. And there are very few things that can guarantee some sort of an investment when it comes to fitness. If you build that fitness level, you can't guarantee that you're going to prevent things. And I know that's a very common thing to be thrown around in the fitness world, and it's kind of toxic. So you can't prevent cancer, and you can't prevent all diseases. We can't make that. We don't have that much control. But fitness really can help you to have a better means from which you can pull from, and it gives you a reservoir to rely on, so that when life throws you some curveballs, like very big hospital stays or some sort of chronic disease, you are more adept to being able to handle it, right? So that's the whole concept of injury mitigation is very similar to exercise and fitness and how it affects our health down the road. So this is one example of how fitness is so much more than how we look. And I know this is not a new message. This is becoming more of the mainstream message, which I love. I love how many women are now lifting weights, and I love how we are moving a little bit away from the aesthetic-based training, and fitness is now being served on a different platter than just here is how to fix your body because your body is wrong and you have all the flaws, and constantly make sure you chase fitness as a way to change your body because that's how you are guaranteed happiness, even though it's like complete bullshit, for lack of better words. Okay, so let's kind of revamp back to the original thing that I wanted to talk about, which is how fitness or approaching fitness from a mindset of aesthetics really can affect and mess up our progress. And I want to think about this as, a lot of people will call this also diet culture. It's diet culture in action. That's what that is, because diet culture tells us that our bodies are ornaments and that our self-worth is tied to how we look and tied to our bodies and our physiques and our aesthetics. And fitness is a way to change that, right? Dieting and exercising are how we fix our bodies, except our bodies aren't broken. There's no ideal aesthetics, and our self-worth is not inherently tied to anything. It's inherent from the day we're born. So ways that fitness can, an aesthetic-based approach to fitness or diet culture can kind of sneak in and take over your approach is going to look like, number one, constantly feeling like you need to feel things to make sure that it's effective. Whether that means you need to be super tired, that means you need to feel a burn, it means you need to sweat, things like that, where we tie our, whether or not we think that the workout was effective into those types of things. That is definitely more of diet culture in action. It is how fitness is sold to us. It is why boot camp and very high intensity exercise programs are really popular, because it combines the way that we think of fitness with it gives us that product, right? It makes us sweat really hard. It makes things burn. It makes us super tired. But I just want you to know that I can make people have a muscle burn. I can get people super tired. You can have lots of sweat, and it can be not super productive. And in fact, always chasing that very often can impact your progress. So let me also say that if you are doing a workout and you are like enjoying the fact that you're sweating and you feel a burn, like there's nothing wrong with that. I am a little bit of I don't even know what I would call myself, but like a gym bro maybe. But I like feeling a burn in certain areas. Sometimes I like getting a pump on. Those things aren't inherently bad, but when we are constantly chasing that and we are determining whether or not our workout was effective based off of if those things are happening, that's when it's problematic. So instead of thinking of a workout as being effective only when we feel something really intense, it's really important to understand what makes an effective workout. And what makes an effective workout is going to depend entirely on what you are trying to do with the workout. So this was where it gets hard, because now we have to use our brains. It's so much easier to just be like, an effective workout is going to be if I'm burning, my muscles are burning, I'm sweating, and I feel like I'm working really hard. But in reality, an effective workout for cardio is going to look very different than an effective workout for if you are just trying to lift and get stronger. It's all going to be depending on your goals, right? So an effective workout is going to be a workout that is completed, first and foremost, is slightly enjoyable. Not all of it needs to be enjoyable, but fitness needs to be enjoyable in some way, shape, or form. And also, it's going to be something that the parameters and the actual workout itself is in line with what your goals are. So if your goals are to get strong and you're destroying yourself doing some sort of like high intensity running around exercises where you're keeping your heart rate up, you're probably not going to get very strong. Strength workouts look like a set of really heavy weight and then pausing and resting and not doing anything for like 2 to 3, upwards of 5 minutes sometimes in between. That's really hard for people who are used to constantly sweating and burning. And actually, if you rush those rest periods, you're not going to be as strong. We need to rest entirely to give our body the ability to reset in between so we can tap back into that strength again. If we can't, we're just not going to be able to lift as much, and then you're not going to be able to progress as much. So you can see now how if we're constantly chasing like more burning and lots of sweat and constant movement, which is what fitness culture tells us, diet culture and aesthetic-based fitness kind of makes us think we constantly need to be moving. And a lot of that boils down to the goal of fitness is to burn as many calories as possible. Most fitness is served on a platter, whether or not you can see it. It might be like covered with a pretty bow and that says it's something else. But most fitness is being sold to us as the goal of fitness is to burn as many calories as possible. And that's what constantly needing to feel like you do more, where you're super tired, where you feel a burn, where you have lots of sweat, that's what that's doing. And that's not necessarily true. Just like I was explaining, a strength workout isn't really, you might not sweat a ton in a strength workout, especially if you're in a nice dehumidified, air-conditioned gym. You may not actually feel a muscle burn in a strength workout. Some of my best workouts I love, like when my legs are a little bit shaky afterwards, also because I have tied that into in the past, some of my workouts being like that. And I've really built strength and muscle mass through that, but not because I feel like I'm completely destroying myself. And it's a little bit of a fun balance between the two, and understanding that your workout doesn't even need to make you feel destroyed. In fact, most people, when I first start working with them, have to get used to leaving a little energy in the tank. And I most often say that when you leave the gym, you should feel energized, not because you took a massive amount of pre-workout, that is false energy, but because your workout felt like it was really good and it energized you. You should not feel drained where you're dragging afterwards, which is very often how I felt when I was not feeling enough and really chasing my CrossFit workouts when I did CrossFit for a few years. So really understand that we don't need to constantly feel things and chase the sweat and the burn for things to be effective. And very often, if we are doing that and we feel that way and we never feel like we're doing enough in our workout, if you don't feel like you're doing enough and you have a coach, just chat with your coach. And you might just not be lifting heavy enough weights, right? Or the intensity might not be there, but it doesn't mean you need to do more. It just might mean you need to do more. It might not mean you need to do more. It might mean you need more weight, or it might mean you need a little bit more of an intensity with the exercises that you're doing. But it might not mean that, and you might be right where you need to be. You're just not used to not completely destroying yourself. And a lot of people who are like ex-diet culture, I don't like the term victims, so I'm trying to think of a better word, but like people who are really stuck in diet culture. By the way, this is me, so I'm talking also from experience. They will also constantly feel like they need to do more, and you will feel like you didn't really do much at first, but that's okay. It's kind of like rewiring your brain. So that's the first one. The second one is going to be related to that, which is that feeling like you need to do more, which really relates more to how like quote unquote dead you feel after the workout. And I want to talk about this from a frame of you should feel energized from your workout, kind of like what I just said, right? But you also like your intensity should not always be a high intensity. And that's why I kind of made this its own little separate point, is when we think about fitness in intensity. So intensity is like how hard you're working. So RPE is rate of perceived exertion. It's one of my favorite ways to measure all of fitness. It's how I prescribe things very often because it's very simple. So if we think about rate of perceived exertion, is just how hard you're physically pushing in and doing some movement. 0 would be absolutely nothing. You're like dead on the couch, right? You're like completely not moving. 10 would be the absolute maximal amount that you could push and do something. You have nothing left. It's like your everything, right? Most fitness is going to fall somewhere in that spectrum. And when I talk to people, we kind of gauge off of, here, I want you at an RPE of 7 to 8, or nope, stick at an RPE of 3 to 4. And I like using that because it's simple to understand and it takes a little bit to skill. But when we are thinking about fitness, we are going to have different types of fitness and at different levels and different intensities. So a high intensity might be that 9, 10. That middle intensity might be like that 5, 6, 7. And And low intensity might be that 2, 3, 4. And so those are the things that I like to kind of give people an understanding. When it comes to fitness, we have a pyramid, and the baseline of fitness should really be some lower, or movement should be some lower intensity movement, some lower intensity exercise. We should have a little bit of that moderate intensity where we're pushing our boundaries a little bit, and then a little, very little, the sprinkle on top, like the top of the pyramid, is going to be high intensity where we're really pushing our boundaries, aiming for a PR. This is going to look different for if you're looking at cardio versus if you're looking at strength training. But if we look at like the bulk of our movement, most of it should be walking and low intensity, and even our cardio should be low intensity if we're doing long duration. And the more intense it is, the less often we should be doing it. So if you're somebody who constantly feels that you need to be doing more and more and pushing, you're most likely pushing those workouts at an 8 or 9 or 10 out of 10 for every single session. The harder you work, the longer it's going to take your body to recover. And if you're doing that 4 to 5 times a week, it's no wonder your body doesn't feel good and you keep getting injured. Baseline foundation for fitness in general, whether it's strength training or it's cardio, is going to be lower intensity. We aren't PRing every single session. Your workout is not a PR. And by PR, if you aren't familiar with what that means, it's personal record or personal best. That's when we're going for our maxes, right? I'm not walking into the gym trying to max out every single session. You can earn the right to do that a little bit here and there. And the longer your training age and the more you've worked on the lower foundation stuff, the more likely you'll be able to do that and recover. But it's only if you've built that foundation. The foundation is really not lifting as heavy as you possibly can. It's learning how to move. It's learning how to challenge yourself. It's in cardio, it's doing a pace, if you're running, that you could run basically forever. It's really low intensity. It's very boring, but that's how the baseline is. We earn our right to high intensities with the foundations and also with the rest and recovery. If we're not recovering well, I tell my clients we're not doing that high intensity stuff. It's not good because it's stress. Whether or not we like to accept it or admit it, high stress is still stress on our bodies, and we need stress to get better. But if we have an untapped, unregulated amount of stress, that's also not good for our bodies. So we have to recover from the stress. And that's the only type of stress that is good for us, is the kind that we can recover from. So constantly feeling like you need to do more will often lead to overtraining. And I like to think of overtraining more as under recovering and just under preparing, because I think sometimes we swing that pendulum too far away from, we'll stop pushing so hard, and then we go into, we'll only do yoga and mobility and rest and mobility flows and breathing. And you know me, you've listened to this podcast, hopefully more than just this one. There is a big spectrum for pushing yourself and not. And we need both at different times and in different intensities and different amounts. But I think sometimes there are like two camps in fitness. There is one that says you should always just push a little bit harder, and fitness is great, and you can handle stress more if you are at a higher fitness level. And then there's the camp that's like, no, we've pushed ourselves too much. We need to rest more. We need to do low intensity movement. And then we fall into that spectrum where we're not challenging ourselves enough. And I like to think of things as always in that gray area right in the middle, where the pendulum kind of swings gently back and forth depending on where you're at in your life and what's going on. So your intensity should be inversely related to your frequency, meaning the more intense, the less frequent you should be doing it, and the less intense, the more frequent you'll be able to do something. So most of your exercise, you just need to make sure it's not this like high intensity thing. I think a lot of people make the mistake of running, thinking they need to PR their mile every single time they start to compete. No athlete is competing multiple times throughout the week, trying to beat themselves every day. There are athletes who do that sometimes, and that is by nature of their sport, right? So like baseball players, how many games do they play throughout the season? Multiple per week, right? They are beat up. They are not the epitome of health. So we shouldn't be using them as the epitome of health, and we should really look at that as, okay, yeah, that's why we don't do that, right? Fitness isn't trying to max out all the time. That's a little bit more ego-based fitness, and you're gonna get there. you may have already been there. I've already been there. Sometimes it still happens, but we can't let the ego kind of want us to constantly PR and see what we're worth and do that unchecked without checking in with our bodies and see how we're feeling. The last way that I want to talk about where an aesthetic-based fitness approach, so pause for 1 second. Going back, that overtraining is often what leads to injuries, by the way. Load management is very important. And when we're pushing high intensity, we're not recovering. That's when we get more likely that we're going to experience pain and injuries, which is a very big reason I'm bringing this up. So I just wanted to highlight that and connect those dots for you. Moving on to the third thing that happens when we are very, very focused on aesthetics only. We aren't listening to our bodies. And we are kind of letting diet culture take the reins instead of understanding like how we should really think about fitness, which is checking in with our bodies, understanding that it's not a, here's my plan, I'm going to follow it and go. It is not a one-way street. It's two ways. We're going back and forth and checking in with ourselves and making modifications as we go. And this is why coaching is very, very helpful. But the last thing I wanted to bring up is a lot of times when we have diet culture taking over our brain and we are very, very focused on our aesthetics, we are constantly focusing on the micro and we're always chasing results. We expect results to happen now. We are constantly doing what we would call body checks, which is looking at your body all the time, expecting some sort of changes. When fitness is sold to us as a way to change our bodies, then it makes sense that we are constantly looking at our bodies as proof that we are working hard. I understand that. I've been there. It's not easy to understand and work through. But we don't need our bodies and how they look to be proof that we have made progress. And a lot of when I work with people, this is like probably the biggest things is they get frustrated with their lack of results. This happens because of that we're tainted with diet culture, right? But that's because we are so taught that the only results to look for are our bodies. But once the people that I work with start to realize what other results to look for, we start to realize, okay, actually I am making really good progress. And once we start to connect those dots and solidify those like neural connections of, wow, okay, so I worked really hard, but here's the result that I didn't notice before. More often than not, when we have been in fitness for a little while, you have results you just aren't aware of. And sometimes that's what, again, a coach can help you with. But sometimes it's just like reflecting and paying attention on how far you've come. So if you are somebody, yes, I'm going to give you some examples. If you are somebody who has been in fitness for a while, but you were not doing any fitness for a while, you already have results of you getting into the gym. That's already that's a result in and of itself, is just consistency and doing the thing. Like, congratulations, high five. That's like what I tell my clients when I work with them and they start doing their cars. And I'm just like, cool, you did them. That is the thing. I don't care if they were perfect. A lot of people are so worried that they're doing them wrong. I'm like, I don't care. I want you to get the habit down first, because that's the hardest thing, is doing something new. So if that's you, cool. Other ways that you won't realize that your fitness is going to affect your life is going to be very small at first. It's going to be things like, oh, I have more energy. Oh, I'm sleeping better. Oh, I don't have that crash at 3 p.m. Maybe I have better emotional regulation. Maybe you would normally go through an event where you would spiral, but you actually kept a better headspace. Those things are really important. And actually, lifting and fitness has a lot of effects on our emotional regulation, which is really cool. Things are intricately linked in our bodies, even though our Western medicine likes to break everything up into pieces. It's not possible. So when we are improving our physical health, we are also improving our mental and emotional health as well, and vice versa. And I love how it all comes together like that. So we really need to be looking for those types of things, even things as simple as your digestion improving. And this is going to be more nutrition related, but it can be due to fitness as well. You might have healthier poops. You might have more consistent bowel movements. Those matter, by the way. If you're not looking at your poop, I did not expect me to go down this path in this podcast. But if you're not, you should. Same thing with your hydration. If you're not looking at the color of your pee to check your hydration status, very simple little thing that I take for granted as somebody who's done that for a little while, for several years. But I know back when I was an undergrad, my self-care and approach to health was trash. And it's no wonder that I had chronic heartburn where I felt like my throat was bleeding every day. So side note, check your bowel movements, check your color of your urination. Like those little things are signs that you're making progress when it comes to your health and fitness. Other things are going to be like it was easier for you to get your groceries out of your car or pick something up, or you didn't think about it when you bent over to lift something, and normally you would have pain, but suddenly you're just like, and you would be so guarded and careful, but the other day you realize that like, oh, I bent over and picked something up and I wasn't guarded and didn't even think about it. This is why it's tricky, is because things that were hard, we are more in tune to like think of, okay, those were all the hard things I went through. But when something was easy, we don't think about it. So we have to intentionally reflect to make those little connections. And this is why like reflecting is so important. And again, like half of my job as a coach and when I work with people is getting them to realize that. So when we are constantly looking for results, not only are we looking for them way too quickly and we look for things way too often and we think little baby fluctuations, we blow those out of proportion and think those are like a result and a byproduct of something like big when they're probably just normal fluctuations. Not only does it make us check for results too much, we also are checking for the wrong results. So we're constantly focused on like the way our bodies look, and we're not really focused on how our bodies feel. And a lot of that, again, is why I don't like diet culture and how we're sold fitness, is because it decreases this great communication we can have with our bodies when we're constantly thinking top down, okay, I'm looking for results. It's like, what if we just like paid 2 seconds of attention to how did my body function in the last like couple of weeks? And like, think about that. Like, can you explain to me in the last like week, even in the last day, how your body functioned? There are things that we don't realize until, again, that they suck. So people will be like, yeah, there are certain things I can't do, like bend over to tie my shoe or cross my one leg over the other leg's fine, but that one's not. Or I can't bend over very well, or it's hard for me to get down to the ground and off of the ground. Those things or how our body's functioning. They're ways our body's communicating to us, but we just don't pay attention. And so a little awareness and reflection can really go a long way. And it really helps us to zoom out and look at the big picture of things and look at all of the progress that we're making and the things that we're doing and how we're setting ourselves up for our future 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old selves. Now somebody is going to blow their leaves or mow the lawn or do whatever they want. So if you hear that, welcome to my life. But that's the third thing that I really wanted to bring up, is just how we approach results. And this is so important because a lot of people will get frustrated very quickly when they're constantly only focused on how their body looks. And very often, that doesn't change, or if it does change, it's not always exactly how we want it to. But also, it makes us completely miss all of the other things that fitness is doing for us. I've always said that fitness needs to be something that we enjoy, right? We've got to find some enjoyable component to it. And part of that also is that we need those little small wins, and you are going to miss those if you're constantly focused on the way that fitness is making you look. And how you look, and constantly just focusing on your appearance. So hopefully that can help you kind of reflect a little bit and start the process of paying a little bit more attention to, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I just constantly am pushing myself. A couple other examples of how, without like going into long bullet points of them, I just want to give you a few examples of how, if you have more of an aesthetic-based approach to fitness, of how that can affect your approach and how that can decrease your results, right? Or increase your risk for pain and injury, is going to be, one, the lack of just like listening to your body. I know that a lot of people struggle with knowing when to take a rest day. And I think more of us know when we need to take a rest day than we give ourselves credit for. I think we just have so much diet culture in us that we don't feel comfortable taking rest days. And I think that's really important. The other thing is when our body is telling us, hey, my knee, my hip, something doesn't feel that great. because we have this one track mind of, no, I have these goals, I'm going to pursue them, and I need to burn a certain number of calories, whatever it is, we are less likely to pay attention to those little naggles or those little injury things. And while I don't want to hyperinflate those as like this big thing, I do think it's really important to pay attention to those. Those are little ways of communication, right? If they are a whisper now, it's only a matter of time before maybe it becomes a very large shout because we didn't listen to it in the first place. And so if we are constantly pursuing fitness from I know I have these results that I'm chasing no matter what, we're less likely to listen to our bodies and adjust accordingly, which leads to burnout. It leads to getting sick more often, and it leads to things like injuries and pain down the road. So those are a couple of good examples as well on how constantly focusing on appearance and aesthetics-based fitness and having diet culture taint our viewpoint of fitness can affect us. So let's chat about making that switch over more to a functional base of like fitness, or like focusing more on how our bodies function. I'm just going to give you a few examples of goals or results that you might be able to chase that have nothing to do with how you look, that are way easier to measure and can really direct your fitness in a way that's going to actually get you somewhere where you feel like you're making progress without constantly being frustrated about the fact that your body changes on a regular basis. And maybe will help you fall in love with fitness again. So one of the basic, most simplest ones is going to be building a better cardio base. I ignored cardio for a very, very long time. I suck at it. I hate cardio, and I probably hate it because I sucked at it. And I suck at it because I hate it. And it's that vicious cycle, right? So I committed to 3 years ago building a better cardio base and just adding cardio in. And guess what? I started to make progress in cardio. I'm still slower than a turtle, like slower than a sloth. Like I'm very slow when it comes to running and things like that. But I've seen my heart rate lower, my resting heart rate lower. I've seen myself get a little faster, be able to go further, and my recovery in general is better. So building a better cardio base is definitely something that you can measure and work towards. Something as simple as getting faster, right? That's also something. Building general strength capacity. Maybe you're not strength training right now and you know that you need to. General strength, just building that. What does that look like? That's a very general goal, but that just means strength training, right? So just 2 days a week, maybe you're going to commit to that. And then your results you're looking for is just showing up and getting it done. And now you are three months later, you look at it and you're like, cool, I got results. That's so much better than worrying about what your body looks like constantly. Maybe you have been in fitness for a little while and you're like, okay, what else can I work on? Like working on your squat depth. Maybe you realize that you aren't going ass to grass or very deep in your squat. And you're like, what if I'm already consistent? What if I just started to work on that a little bit more? Or what about just picking a lift that you want to build your strength on or get better at? Maybe you're going to pick a weakness season where you're like, I know all of the things I suck at. I'm going to do those in my program. And maybe I'm going to do one thing I love in all of my workouts. Because again, we still need to make sure we enjoy something. Maybe you want to work on getting your first pull up. Maybe you want to achieve 5 push-ups without any assistance completely from the ground. Or maybe you want to get just basic shoulder rotation. You know your shoulder rotation is not very good. These are all examples of function. Now I will stop here for a minute and let you know that we have to be very careful about making the switch from the way our bodies look to the way our bodies function. We don't want this to be something else we attach our identities and self-worth to. Once we do that, it also becomes really hard to listen to our bodies and make the adjustments as needed. The second we have our ego right up front and we are like, no, it's very, what I would call performative, right? Performance-based. I'm going to tie my self-worth now into this goal. It's very easy to do that. Been there, done that, can speak from experience. And it is almost like not a guarantee, but it's like the next step that often happens with many people. So that's why I'm bringing this up. Just automatically choosing a different goal without kind of recognizing how much you're tying your self-worth into fitness and your identity can also lead to the same similar things of hyper-focusing on the results, ignoring all of your actual wins because the main goal wasn't achieved, not listening to your body, achieving burnout, not feeling like you're going hard enough all the time because your results aren't there, right? The things that I talked about in this podcast can very much happen as a byproduct of also just chasing a performance goal. So we have to be very careful to make sure that it's not, that's that's another way that diet culture is still sneaking in, because it's telling us that our identities, but it's really telling us that our self-worth is attached and correlated to how well we're performing and how many results we're getting and how hard we're working. And if you notice that's you, it might be a good time to seek out a therapist to kind of work on some of this with you, because that can be very detrimental in your fitness and impact your ability to sustain fitness in the long run, because you might end up injured, burnt out, sick. There can be a lot of things that happen when we go down this like long-term route of what I was explaining. And what I care the most about when it comes to fitness is that this can be something you do forever, because fitness isn't something you achieve. It's a means to an end. It's just something you are always working on. And that's why there's so many different options to pick, which is why it can be overwhelming sometimes too, and why having a coach can be really helpful. So make sure that we are not doing something that is impacting our ability to continue with fitness in the long run. So that was a very long podcast. We got into a lot of topics, but it's something that's really near and dear to my heart, and something that I pay attention to a lot in people that I work with. And I've noticed these themes a lot. So if hopefully this was helpful and kind of really sparked some reflection, I would highly recommend, maybe if you're a writer into writing a journal entry, or maybe chatting with somebody who's close to you after this to kind of reflect on things, because hearing something is one thing, but taking action on it is another, and it can be really helpful to do that. So with that being said, I will leave you with a thank you for listening. And if you have not already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe so that you do not miss any of the new episodes every Friday. If you have not already given us a 5-star rating, please go do that. I appreciate those of you who have already. It's how we get more people to hear all of these great things. And if you like the message, you like what you hear, please do that, and or share the podcast with somebody that you know would benefit from hearing this. And if there was something that you absolutely loved, please share it. Tag me if you're on social media, or if you would just like to send me a quick note of something that you liked, you can always email me or find me on Instagram and send me a message. I love reading them. They're so helpful. And sometimes it reminds me that I'm not just talking to myself in these podcasts. So I love hearing from you. But I think that's everything. So I will chat with you on the next podcast.